that was interesting about the framing of the Constitution in 1787, and of course it occurred over the summer in Philadelphia, is that it was something that was a little bit, well, beyond the charge of what the framers were supposed to do. Many of you may know this history, but there was a convention in Annapolis the summer before, and well, the fall before, in which James Madison and just a handful of states met, and they said, well, we've got a lot of problems with the Articles of Confederation. It's too loosely knit. There are trade wars already beginning between the states. We need to have some amendments to the Articles of Confederation. And so only a few states met at the Annapolis State House. And so they went back to Congress, and James Madison, who was one of the people at the Annapolis Convention, said, he lobbied his members of Congress on the Articles of Confederation, we've got to have bigger changes, because this is not working. And so the Congress in 1787, in January, he was lobbying them in January, February, they called for a constitutional convention. The purpose of the constitutional convention was for the sole purpose of drafting amendments to the Articles of Confederation. Not a whole new government, just amendments to the Articles of Confederation, which would then be given back to Congress to approve. The amendments were specifically supposed to be on the subject of trade between the states. Well, what happened, of course, was they had a much bigger scheme. And really this is the brainchild of James Madison. He's the father of the Constitution in so many ways. But he said, he knew all along that, or at some point he decided they had to go for something bigger. They had to go for a whole new form of government. And he was like, think of a committee. Everyone in this room, except for some of the younger folks, has been on a committee before, right? Now, when you go to a committee, and nobody particularly wants to be there, and there's a lot of work to do for the committee, who ends up deciding what happens in that committee? The chairman? Or in some cases, even one person can be even more important than the chairman, the person who writes something out and hands out paper, right? If anyone bothers to write out an agenda or to offer a proposal and put it on paper, that person ultimately probably controls the whole committee, right? Because they sort of put out a map for everybody else, and that's sort of the starting point. That's what James Madison did. He started out long before the Constitutional Convention, and he wrote the so-called Virginia Plan. And the Virginia Plan actually called for a much stronger Congress than what we have today, but that was his starting point. And he knew that they were, and that was already going beyond what the Congress had given the charge to the delegates. Was this plan was going to draft a whole new system of government, and they were only charged with just drafting a few amendments. Now, in order to pull it off, James Madison needed to get some other powerful Virginians involved, and the best person he could possibly get was George Washington. George Washington was a walking, talking, living legend. There's nobody in American society today who even comes close to George Washington in terms of the esteem of the American people. I mean, you think of it. He was the equivalent of a winning general, not one of many winning generals, but a winning general who led the United States through its birth in the war. He was the equivalent of a movie star in terms of nobody else was so famous. He was the equivalent of a sort of benevolent philosopher type, and people wanted to listen for every word that George Washington would write, would speak. And so he was, sort of a giant among people. If George Washington slept here actually meant something. I mean, this was really a big deal. And so getting George Washington was perhaps James Madison's second biggest stroke of genius, next to writing the Virginia Plan. Because you get George Washington to be the chairman of the convention. George Washington didn't actually participate that much in the debates. I mean, he did from time to time, but he wasn't the one offering amendments and offering ideas. But having him sitting there made all the difference in the world. Because if George Washington was part of it, then the project had legitimacy, and the project was something that the American people were going to follow. And so the Constitutional Convention meets in the hot, muggy summer of 1787. And if any of you spent a summer in Philadelphia, you know that is hot. I spent a summer there during law school, and I rented a room in one of those old, townhouse things. These units that are like 15 feet wide and 3 stories tall. And I had one little room, and it was so hot that I tried spending one night without air conditioning, and I couldn't do it. The very next day, I was like looking to buy window air conditioner units from USF. I don't know how they existed without air conditioning, but they did. And they did it. Not only that, without air conditioning, they had all the windows shuttered because they were meeting in secret. Because they didn't want to leak out prematurely that they were going to be having a whole new constitution. So they draft this project. the Madisonians, the Virginians, they have the edge. Everybody's moving toward the Virginia plan. Then some of the delegates step back and say, "Oh, this is going too far," and they offer the New Jersey plan, which is basically a much less drastic series. Indeed, the New Jersey plan was just a set of amendments to the Articles of Confederation, what the Confederation Congress initially asked for. And at any rate, there's this big debate, a series of compromises occur. And also, very important, a number of delegates walk out of the convention. This is really important because the convention, a lot of people think, well, it was a stroke of genius. Everybody automatically agreed to what was going to come out of that convention, and it was inevitable that the Constitution would emerge and be accepted by the American people. But no, there were 55 delegates coming from 12 states. Now, one state didn't even want to be a part of it. Anyone guess what that state was? What was it? Rhode Island, exactly. Pesky Rhode Island. They're always causing trouble. Rhode Island did not want to be a part of it. And so they didn't even send a delegation. So 12 states sent 55 delegates. Anyone want to guess how many actually signed? How many of those 55 stayed there till the end and actually were willing to sign the document at the end of the day? 39. 16 people said, "We can't do this. We can't go this far." Why did most of those 16 either leave or refuse to sign the document? This is really important.
Fear.
What's that?
Fear.
Fear of what?
Yeah.
Too strong a central government.
Too strong a central government. Well, fear of too strong a central government. They thought this was too strong. And believe me, the central government that the framers had come up with was an itty-bitty, tiny central government compared to the amount of central government that we have today. I mean, they thought that that was going to be too big. And that central government was 1/100th of what we have today in terms of the percentage of power that is accumulated in the federal government. And so that's why it's so important to realize they knew from the beginning that power, centralized power, was going to be dangerous in America. And they thought that there was already too much. Some of them also said that they thought there needed to be a Bill of Rights. Another objection was they thought it would be too difficult to amend. George Mason, who was quite a statesman for Virginia, in many ways Mason was more famous than Madison, not as famous as Washington, but George Mason wouldn't sign it. He thought the Constitution would be too difficult to amend, and this might be problematic. And in many ways, he's right. We've only had 27 amendments over the course of 200 plus years. So anyway, only 39 sign it. One state, then it goes to the states for ratification. And then this is the other thing. The way that the Articles of Confederation worked, once the convention came up with these amendments, they were supposed to go back to Congress, and then they would go out and they would have to be approved unanimously by all 13 states. Well, the framers said, we'll change the rules a little bit. We'll make it 9 states. And so we'll kind of, it's like a committee usurping the body that creates the committee. And that was fine. They did that. But some of the states didn't. One state decided we're not going to go to then the states have their own ratifying conventions. And one of the states said, no, we're going to put it to a popular vote. That state was Rhode Island. Again, I said, well, let's let the people vote on it. And so Rhode Island held the vote. And let's see if I have the exact vote for you. Yeah, I didn't bring it along, but I can tell you what the margin was. Anyone want to guess what happened in Rhode Island? Did it succeed or did it fail? It failed. It failed miserably by a vote of about 10 to 1. Let's see if I have the exact vote here in my notes. No, I didn't bring that up. But it was just an astonishing. It was roughly like 10,000 opposed to 1,000 in favor. It was a really, really lopsided vote. Again, why were they opposed to it? Not because of the structure of it or the fact that we would have a president or that we have 2 houses of Congress. None of that. It was too much power in the central government.